Hello, I'm Daisy of Dumaguete InfoNet Service. Siquijor Provincial Governor Saldi S. Villa executed and signed Executive Order No. 2021 ZSV-16 Series of 2021 last March 5. Under the new executive order, it states the province travel restrictions, travel requirements, health and safety protocols, penalties, and much more. Before we start, make sure you subscribe to our channel and click on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. The following are the latest guidelines for traveling to Siquijor from Dumaguete City and vice versa. Under Section 1 Health and Safety Protocols, minimum public health standards shall be complied with at all times for the duration of the MGCQ or Modified General Community Quarantine whenever outside of residence, in public, or in workplaces as follows. A. Physical and social distancing of at least 1 meter between and among persons. B. Mandatory wearing of reusable, washable face mask and face shields or such other protective equipment or in any combination thereof. C. Hand disinfection using alcohol or frequent washing with soap and water. D. Observance of personal hygiene and sanitation at all times. Travel requirements for returning overseas Filipino workers or OFWs. In compliance to the DILG Memorandum Circular No. 2020-087, OFWs are overseas Filipinos whose primary reason for being outside the country or for leaving the country is based on a contract of employment in a foreign nation or a vessel flying another nation's flag and shall be allowed entry to the province with prior coordination to the OOWA or OWA and after the submission of the following requirements. 1. Submit the Notice of Quarantine Facility Availability, 2 weeks validity at the MDRRMO office and must be duly signed by your respective mayor. Kindly submit ahead of time prior to the OFW flight schedule at the Office of Sangguniang Kabataan, Provincial Federation President. 2. Negative RT-PCR or swab test result with 72 hours validity upon date of swab collection. 3. Certificate from the Bureau of Quarantine. After completing all the requirements, a coordination permit from the Siquijor Provincial Task Force COVID-19 through the Office of the Sangguniang Kabataan Provincial Federation President will be released. Travel requirements for returning non-overseas Filipino workers or non-OFWs. Non-OFWs are overseas Filipinos whose primary reason for being outside the country is not based on a contract of employment in a foreign nation or a vessel flying another nation's flag, such as returning students, J1 visa holders, exchange visitors program, returning Filipino diplomats, returning Filipino tourists, participants of Philippine government-sponsored programs, dependents and accompanying foreign spouses and balikbayans will also be allowed entry following the requirements. 1. Submit the Notice of Quarantine Facility Availability, 2 weeks validity at the MDRRMO office and must be duly signed by your respective mayor. 2. Negative RT-PCR or swab test result with 72 hours validity upon date of swab collection. 3. Certificate from the Bureau of Quarantine. After completing all the requirements, a coordination permit from the Siquijor Provincial Task Force COVID-19 through the Office of the Sangguniang Kabataan Provincial Federation President will be released. Both OFW and non-OFW will only complete the remainder of his or her 14-day quarantine period at the designated quarantine facility, subject to the LGU health protocol. Upon arrival, anti-agent swab test shall be conducted. After 72 hours, another antigen swab test shall be performed and will be released after completing the remainder of his or her quarantine period. Protocol for Vaccinated OWF and ROF. 1. Traveler must be asymptomatic to pass the health screening at all entry points. 2. Present the certificate from the Bureau of Quarantine. negative RT-PCR result with 72 hours validity upon date of swab collection and valid immunization record from the following information: the type of vaccine, batch number, lot number, date of vaccination for first dose, second dose, and other pertinent data as required by the country of origin for their vaccination record. 3. Antibody test. 4. If the RT-PCR result is negative, the traveler may now be allowed to conduct their reason for the visit. 5. If the RT-PCR result is negative, options will be to repeat RT-PCR test on 5-day, and if negative, no need to do mandatory 5-day quarantine or to undergo the 10-day quarantine without a retest. 6. If RT-PCR is positive upon arrival, mandatory 10-day quarantine. Requirements for local travelers. 1. Only negative RT-PCR swab test results with accredited laboratories and copy of valid IDs shall be presented upon the arrival at the port of destination. Strict implementation of no negative RT-PCR swab test, no entry, shall be done before departure at the port. The Philippine Coast Guards shall send a manifesto of the passengers to the PDRRMO for monitoring purposes of the PLGU. 2. All travelers upon arrival shall undergo health screening or triage to examine them whether they show symptoms of COVID-19. 3. Travelers shall be required to undergo quarantine unless they exhibit symptoms upon arrival at the LGU of destination. 4. If the traveler exhibits symptoms, he or she will undergo RT-PCR swab test at the nearest schedule and will be isolated at the designated LGU isolation facility. If result is negative, the traveler may discontinue isolation. If result is positive, he or she shall complete the remainder of the mandatory isolation period until released by the medical doctor. The testing cost, extended accommodation, and other related expenses shall be shouldered by the traveler. 5. Siquijor travelers who will travel to Dumaguete will be required an anti-agent swab test result valid for 48 hours from its date of swab collection and an acceptance letter from the Dumaguete City Tourism Office. 6. Travelers via Siquijor, Dumaguete, and vice versa who happen to travel beyond the validity of their negative antigen swab 48 hours from its date of swab collection will require RT-PCR swab test before entry in Siquijor Province, valid for 72 hours from its date of swab collection. 7. For the medical patients admitted or underwent medical checkup and/or operation and the respective watchers, Siquijor, Dumaguete, and vice versa, upon arrival, an antigen swab test shall be conducted. Once tested negative, travelers will proceed to designated LGU quarantine facility. After 72 hours or 3 days, another antigen swab test shall be conducted. Once tested negative, he or she may go home. 8. Travelers with expired or no RT-PCR swab test result shall have the following options. Option A. Go back to the port of origin or at the Dumaguete City port to get RT-PCR swab test. Or Option B. Obtain an RT-PCR swab test in Siquijor Province and will temporarily stay for 3 to 5 days at the accredited hotel or resort. Again, the testing cost, accommodation, and other related expenses shall be shouldered by the traveler. Requirements for tourists in Siquijor. Before tourists plan their trip, make sure that the LGU of origin will allow it. To make travel easier for tourists, please follow the following steps. Step 1. Register at www.s-pass.ph. Step 2. Register online through SiquijorProvince.com website. Step 3. Secure and submit a JPEG copy of the following documents: government-issued ID, current school ID for students, and passport for foreigners. Negative RT-PCR test result. Booking acknowledgement and/or receipt from DOT or the Department of Tourism or Siquijor Provincial Tourism Council accredited accommodation. And Step 4, the Provincial Tourism Office shall send a QR code for contact tracing, regulations for Siquijor tourists during travel. 1. Compulsory wearing of face mask and face shield, social distancing, frequent hand washing with soap and water or disinfection with alcohol. 2. Tourists must bring hard copies of their submitted documents for verification purposes by authorities. 3. Tourists who fail to register online are accepted at the port of entry but shall do late registration at the port. Travelers who enter the province without RT-PCR are required to secure RT-PCR test. Hence, they are given two options. A. Secure an RT-PCR in Dumaguete City, or B. Submit for RT-PCR testing in Siquijor, which may take 3 to 5 days to get the result. Arrival, accommodation, and retesting in Siquijor. 1. At the port of entry, traveler shall present QR code and shall undergo triage. Once cleared, he or she shall proceed to booked accommodation. 2. Symptomatic travelers have the option to return to the place of origin or undergo RT-PCR test in Siquijor at their own expense. 3. When tested positive at RT-PCR, he or she shall be brought to the designated quarantine hotel for tourists for 14 days at their own expense. 4. Tourist accommodation establishments are enjoined to be flexible in the bookings of guests due to quarantine and treatment. Bookings and/or refunds shall be made available for tourists. 5. Tourists are enjoined to check in or out by scanning the QR code of establishments such as accommodations, restaurants, tourism sites, and etc. 6. Always bring QR code and present to authorities when needed and for contact tracing while in Siquijor. Exemptions. The Government of Siquijor may grant exceptions in certain circumstances, balancing the needs for stringent measures against COVID-19 and for the restoration of economic activity in the province. Written requests and approval shall be made in such situations. Penalties and sanction to violators. Violators of this executive order shall be penalized in accordance with Republic Act No. 11332. Drinking liquor in public and curfew. Serving and selling of liquor in private and/or commercial establishments in public places will be allowed, provided that the guests shall be limited to 50% of the venue capacity. The curfew period in Siquijor will be from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. in the whole province with the following exemptions. A. Workers and employees going to and coming from work. B. Fishermen doing night fishing. C. Individuals under medical care and emergencies. D. On-duty health workers, police and military personnel, and Siquijor Provincial Task Force COVID-19 members. E. Any person involved in an emergency situation, like rescuers and first aid responders. Curfew violators shall be fined ranging from 3,000 pesos to 5,000 pesos. To read the full 13 pages of the Siquijor Executive Order No. 2021 ZSV-16 Series of 2021, please check our video description for link. Please be reminded that we are not the Siquijor Government Office, nor the Dumaguete City Tourism Office. For more information, please check our video description to see contact information. Keep yourself up to date. Don't forget to click the subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. Safe travels!